The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the 911 ETC webinar, Remote Workers and E911, and how organizations are solving the problems. My name is Kevin Keto, and I'm joined today by Mike Anderson. He is the National Sales Director of 911 ETC. He's going to be going over a lot of the different solutions that are possible for protecting at-home workers, people using soft phones, that type of thing. We will also be taking questions at the end of the webinar. There's a chat bar on the side where it says questions. Just please enter your questions there, and we will be answering them at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I will be turning this over to Mike Anderson.
Thanks, Kevin. So some of the items that we're going to be going over today, just briefly about 911 ETC, why implement E911, how we handle the remote IP hard phones as well as soft phone users, and some software that we've developed that will actually allow the users to provision their own locations. And then just some of the competitive advantage of the 911 ETC solution. At the end, as Kevin mentioned, we will take some questions and answer what we can. Next slide, please. A little bit of background about 911 ETC. We've been around since 1997. All we do is enhance 911. We don't specialize in any other products or services. We've focused all of our energies on E911 over the years. Where we really shine is for our customers is managing their 911 database, as well as now routing the calls in the cloud to the appropriate PSAP. More and more companies that are doing like flat and consolidate extending their enterprise are having remote sites hanging off a core, which presents a challenge for E911. We're able to take that call from a core and route it anywhere in North America for them, which obviously gives the ability now to cover the remote workers or highly nomadic soft phone users. Next slide, please. Just some of the reasons that our customers do implement E911. Obviously, it's just the right thing to do. Protects your most important asset, which are your people. There are legal mandates in various states that require E911 to either a certain square footage or zoning principle. In other states, it actually talks about getting down to the desktop, but that's something that your legal group would have to determine how you want to address the various legislation. And even in states where there is no legislation, we have numerous customers that do address the E911 issue just because of a liability standpoint and the exposure to that liability. Next slide, please. This slide I just brought up quickly just to address the fact that some things that I'm talking to customers that they don't think about is that if you do have a remote worker that's maybe in one of these states and your PBX resides in maybe a state that doesn't require it, it might be something you want to have your legal to look at to see if maybe you are in non-compliance. I'm not an attorney, but you can go to our website at www.911etc.com and pull up the existing legislation in any of those states that are in red, which do require it. The ones in dark blue are ones that legislation is pretty much imminent and coming very soon. But like I said, just because the state doesn't require it or doesn't have legislation, still does not mean that you're relieved or absolved of any liability. Next slide, Kevin. So the way the calls would route for remote workers, in the past we did what we would call PS Alley, and what that would mean is you contract with a local carrier where you had your PBX. You would get an account set up and you'd be able to load your 911 records into that 911 database. There were some limitations in terms of you would need local trunks everywhere you had a physical phone. So in certain cases, if you had a remote worker that's a couple counties over from where the PBX resides, if they dialed 911, you could not get that call back to the PSAP nearest to where that call originated. So that presented some challenges in terms of E911 doing it the old PS Alley way. What has come about, the newer technology is called what we call a voice positioning center or voice positioning server type database. And think of it as like a national 911 database. You no longer need to contract with a local carrier everywhere you had physical phones. You no longer needed local trunks where you had physical phones. And you're now able to also provision your location information and have a near real-time update into the 911 database. In the past, the old PS Alley, you would send an update and they wouldn't guarantee it would post till 24 hours later. So to try to cover, a remote worker that's moving back and forth in places, by the time it's provisioned in the database, they might have moved again. So it doesn't do any good. But with the voice positioning center type database, when you provision your location, it's a matter of 3 to 5 seconds. That information is in the 911 database and will then route to the appropriate PSAP. So if you look at this diagram, we have these remote, home office, someone working from home, or a soft phone user that's working from home. And what we do is we would then provision their location into the voice positioning server. And this is the database. So when a 911 call is placed, it would hit the PBX, it doesn't matter what type of PBX, and that call then would be delivered to us via SIP or PSTN, meaning we provide an access number where you call forward your 911 calls to our voice positioning server out of PRI. Once that call hits our voice positioning center, we do a lookup based on the ANI, or the DID that's presented to us, and since we've already provisioned the location in here, we know where it's located, and we send that call then to the selective router nearest to that person's home or wherever they're working remotely. And that selective router that will then go to the PSAP, they'll do a data dip into the 911 database, and up will come that person's home address or wherever they're working from remotely. As I mentioned earlier, we can provision this information in a matter of seconds later. If they dial 911, that call gets the PSAP nearest to their home office. Now, a lot of people think, oh, well, why doesn't someone just pick up their home phone and dial 911 or their cell phone? And that's a valid argument. But there have been cases, we've had customers come to us where someone actually dialed 911 from their soft phone or their VPN hard phone, and that call went to a local PSAP nearest where the PBX resides. In fact, one of our customers is actually Avaya themselves, and they had an incident with one of their employees that dialed 911, or his daughter actually dialed 911 from a VPN hard phone, and it went to a PSAP in another state where the call actually was leaving their data center. The PSAP operator said, you're going to have to hang up that phone and find another phone to dial 911 because we cannot help you. So it does come up, and more people, especially the younger crowd, they don't have home phones anymore. So, it's really up to an organization to determine what kind of liability this presents to them. Some of our customers choose to ignore them. Others think it's a big deal, and they choose to address the issue. It's not terribly expensive to cover a remote worker if indeed they dialed 911 from their VPN hard phone or soft phone from their home. Next slide, Kevin, please. Some of the advantages of the 911 TC solution really is we use an underlying carrier. Everybody that's providing these types of solutions uses an underlying carrier which has a connection into all the selective or 911 tandem routers in the country, or in North America for that matter. And we feel that Bandwidth, who we contract with as an underlying carrier, they have very good coverage in terms of the North America. It's 99.7% of all of North America that they have coverage in, meaning they can get into 99.7% of those PSAPs. We also have SoftLoc, which allows a user to self-provision their location, and this can all be done at a very affordable rate. The pricing is quite low compared to what it used to be 5, 6, 7 years ago for implementing E911. Next slide, Kevin. So one of our customers, John Hancock, came to us and said, in the past we would have a URL where a user could go in and provision the location of their phones. But John Hancock came to us and said, look, guys, I need a way to force my soft phone users, when they go home or take their phone home and they're working, I need to force them to update or put in their location of where they're at this time. Just because of the liability exposure to the organization, these users don't understand how important it is to provision their location. So what we did is we developed a product called SoftLoc, and what it does, it's really a play on words, soft phone location, but really what it does is it gives the ability for that user, and it prompts them to update their location. It can work on any type of soft phone in a Windows or a Mac operating system. Next slide, Kevin. So the way this works is we would load a client, which is an IIS deployable client, to a laptop on their soft phone. Then we would load an application, which is basically software, on a server at the customer's location or in their data center, wherever it might be. It could be on a virtual machine, whatever they choose. But that client then speaks to the application. So when someone provisions their location on their soft phone, that updates the application, which is in their customer's environment, and then that application updates our 911 database. So it takes about 3 to 5 seconds. Once they input their location and hit set as current, then they will be provisioned in the 911 database. Next slide, Kevin. So some of the things some of the features of SoftLoc is, first of all, it will prompt the user. What we do is we pull the NATed IP address. So if they've had their soft phone in the office and they pick it up and take it home and fire it up, it's going to ping that NATed IP address, and it's going to know it's different from when they last used it. So up is going to come a prompt saying, hey, you've moved your phone, please update your location. And if they put in, for instance, if they put in an address and they put in this 3035 Thunderbird Road, Phoenix, Arizona, and there's no such MSAG valid address, which means it has to match up exactly what's in the Master Street Address Guide, also known as MSAG. But if they put in an address that is not a valid MSAG, up will come a couple suggestions that are very close to it. Did you mean East Thunderbird Road or did you mean West Thunderbird Road? There's no 3035 Thunderbird Road in the Master Street Address Guide. So it will, obviously it's very user-friendly and intuitive in terms of someone puts in a wrong address, it's not a real address, it'll come back and say, no, it's not a real address, did you mean this? We'll then validate, obviously, that to the MSAG, and then it will store it. So if they just go home and they go into the office and that's the only place they go with that, they'll just click on set as current when they go home and they're done. They don't have to go in there and put in their address every single time. It'll store it in there and they'll just hit set as current. Next slide, Kevin. So another feature, and as I mentioned earlier, John Hancock wanted us to force the user. So as an administrator, the organization has the ability to disable that soft phone and they cannot use it until they put in a valid address. So if they try to tab through that prompt that says, please put in your location, and they try to tab through it and just go ahead and use their phone, up will come this no location set. You're not going to be able to use your phone, and it'll terminate the application. So until they go back in there and put a valid address, they can't even use that phone. So it's one way that, John Hancock felt that, okay, we've covered ourselves. They can't use it unless they put in a valid address. Next slide, Kevin. So as I mentioned earlier, we can monitor any type of soft phone application out there. You can pull up your caller list. You can edit the callers. And this is all what an administrator has the ability to do. So they can go in and see what phone numbers are provisioned in the database. They can go click on that option, force the soft phone to click location specified. They can change the polling interval, how often we ping that NATed IP address. We have a couple of new features also. For instance, we had a customer ask us if we could ignore certain IP addresses, so when they go into the office with their soft phone, they're not constantly getting pings saying, hey, update your location. So we developed it so when they go into the office, if we know that their range of IP addresses, we can ignore those. And then once they leave the enterprise, obviously if they fire that up at their home, it's going to know, okay, that's not part of that enterprise's IP range. It'll prompt them and say, hey, please update your location. Next slide, Kevin. As I mentioned earlier, anything that an administrator would want to know at any time, they can go see what phone numbers are provisioned, what their locations are, who's using it, all that kind of stuff. Anything they want to know in terms of their users, so they can go and take a quick snapshot, see who's using it, where they're using it at, what IP addresses they're connected to, allow the user to self-register with a password. Gives it all the control to the administrator. So, I mean, you have all kinds of options in terms of, what you want to do, and who you want to provision it or allow you to use this as well. Kevin, next slide. As I mentioned earlier, this will shift a lot of that liability from the customer, not really to 911 ETC, but really back on to the user, especially with the SoftLoc and the soft phones. because it's on them to put in that location, and if you actually use the option to force them, then obviously they can't use that phone to dial 911 unless they put in a valid address. So the customer has covered himself, and the user has, in the event that they're panicking and they're getting chest pains and they happen to be on their soft phone, they dial 911 with it, they would show up to their home, knock down the door, and save the person's life if needed. And as I mentioned earlier, this is very affordable. In the past, E911 was a very spendy thing, but prices have come down as technology's gotten better, and you can cover as many soft phone or remote workers as you want for very minimal cost now. We also take this data. It's backed up off-site, and it's not accessible to any external networks if people are worried about the data security. And we feel that we use the best underlying carrier out there in terms of the connections and the fully IP-enabled network from end to end. Next slide, Kevin. I'm not going to go through all this, but we will have this available, this PowerPoint, for anybody that would like it. Just send us an email, and we can provide this to you, a recording of this. But this just gives you a kind of thing of what we do. We back up the data. We can provide reports of the data at any time to the customer. We can load the data for the customer. For instance, as I mentioned, Avaya earlier, they provided us a list of their remote workers and their home address and their phone number. We provisioned all that information in the database, and they have now a process. If someone were to move, they actually would notify us, and we would make those changes into the 911 database. The customer can do it themselves, or we can do it for them. It's whatever the customer would like to do. Next slide, Kevin. And really, as I mentioned earlier, we've been around since 1997. This is all we do. We feel that we are the experts in the industry in terms of E911. We can, like I said earlier, we can work with any type of soft phone, but we are very tight with Avaya and Cisco. But we can work with any type of PBX. Both the soft loop and the remote worker solution will work with any type of PBX or communication system. All we need is a valid DID and a location. We can route that call anywhere in North America for our customers. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, we are a select product within Avaya. We actually, as I mentioned, we did deploy the solution within Avaya's own corporate enterprise, and are actually pushing this out to more and more sites for them. But they've really embraced our solution because it's so cost effective and it works. I mean, and that's all that matters. We've been doing this for quite some time, and we feel very confident in our abilities in terms of helping our customers address whatever issues that come up. And more of our customers are coming to us with remote workers, soft phone users from home, and how do we address this? And I just tell them it can be done very inexpensively, and I think it's something that's very important. If you can save a life, I mean, it's a great thing to do. Next one, Kevin. Yeah, so we're about done here, but as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter what kind of PBX it is, but we are a Cisco developer partner as well. We've developed this, we deployed this for many of our Cisco customers, but really the soft load actually just kills the application, so it does not matter what type of soft phone it is. So in terms of it came to us with a Mitel or Siemens or whatever, it wouldn't make a difference. It would work the same. Next one, Kevin. So this is just some of our customers. A lot of our customers are starting to deploy this. One of the first actually adopters of this technology was Apple, but more and more of our customers are actually reaching back out to us. We deployed this 5-10 years ago, our E911 solution. Now they're coming back to us and saying, hey, look, we're starting to have a lot more remote workers. We're starting to push people, allow them to work from home. We're giving them soft phones. How do we address this? So we can definitely address this issue, and for a low cost and effective solution. And that's really about it. I don't know if anybody has any questions, Kevin, or if any questions will come in. I don't have that visibility, but we'd be happy to answer any of those. Or if you'd like to reach out to us after this, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have there too.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, we do have a few questions here. The first one is your soft phone client supported in a thin client / Citrix environment for remote workers using 1X agent?
I believe I know the answer to this, but we have Travis on the line, and I defer to him because he's a little bit more technically savvy. Travis, do you know that answer?
Sure. No, I don't actually know the answer, but definitely we could set up a lab in that environment. We haven't had any requests to set up in a Citrix or thin client environment yet, but definitely we can set up a lab. A lab wouldn't take too long, possibly a day to set up, and we could take it from there.
Yeah, so what Travis said, I mean, it is very easy to set up like a sandbox to play around and test this out. We've done it with many of our customers before they actually purchase the software. So if that's something that is of interest, we'd be more than willing to do that for you.
Okay. And there's another question here. My company has a sticker on the laptop to tell the users to not use this for 911 purposes. Is that something that would be covered in legislation?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I have come across other companies doing the same thing. You know, I'm not an attorney, but I just know that if someone is in a panic situation and you know your chest is tight and you don't have a phone handy and but you have your soft phone in front of you, you know, I'm not, like I said, I'm not an attorney, so I don't know where that liability would lie. But you know, it's very inexpensive to address that. I mean, it's probably almost the cost of a sticker per month. I mean, really, so it's not really that much to cover them. But like I said, you'd have to go back to your legal people and ask them that because that's above my expertise. But I have heard of other customers doing the same thing. But that was back when this technology did not exist to cover them. Lately, you know, I have not seen that come up, but you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I saw it quite often with a few companies that we work with. I'm sorry to not really answer your question, but that's definitely a legal question that I don't like to make those kind of, I don't like to answer those questions because I'm not an attorney.
Got it. So here's another question. Actually, there's two questions, and I'll kind of combine them into one because they're basically asking the same thing. One of them is, when is the screen pops? When do they come up? And the other one is a software pop up when the soft phone is launched? So basically, it's basically asking the same question: is when do those pops come up?
It's when the soft phone is launched. But Travis, do you want to talk about that? Because I think we make some changes to that in terms of delaying it a little bit for a customer recently.
Yes, that's correct. The soft log itself will start when the laptop starts or the operating system starts. Pop-ups will begin when the soft phone or the location is not provisioned. It could also pop up when it can't talk to the actual server. So the time it pops up, it varies depending on the situation. Mike just mentioned the delay in startup. We can force the softload client to not prompt for location for a certain amount of time to give users a chance to connect to the VPN. That was one feature request recently added.
So yeah, as Travis mentioned, it's configurable. I mean, there's certain things that we can customize for a customer if needed. So you know, if there's certain requests, then we can generally make those happen for a customer. In some cases, it does take some development, but it's very customizable for whatever the customer wants.
I have another question here. How do you handle cell phone calls that are leveraging a premise-based PBX for outbound calls?
So if you're on premise, generally what we would do is assign a phone number, or what we call an ELIN, emergency location identification number, to an access point. If that call is leaving the enterprise not on the wireless network, if it's on the wireless network, you know, Verizon Wireless, AT&T, then obviously we can't do anything with it. But if it's leaving the PBX, like I understood your question, you would assign a phone number to an access point. So if that person, you know, whoever's connected to this access point on this first floor, this building, we would take that phone number and the location of that access point and load that into the 911 database. So when they dial 911, the 911 operator is going to get the phone number or the key limits assigned to that access point, and they will do a dip into the database, and up will come the location of that access point. That's about as good as we can do in that scenario in terms of pinpointing a location within the enterprise.
So there's actually a follow-up question to that. On the cell phone, if they are connected to the wireless network, how is that call processed?
Yeah, AT&T, Verizon Wireless, generally it's triangulation between cell towers, and they don't let anybody else touch that stuff. That's all on them. So in most cases, though, it is triangulation from the various cell towers. They can get a good XY coordinates. It's the Z coordinates that's the problem. You know, the altitude. If you're in a 30-story building, can be an issue, but that's the way it generally works.
Okay. And then we have a few more questions here still. Does the server need to be dedicated to this application?
No, absolutely not. We have some customers that buy for the enterprise IP discovery software, and we load that on the same virtual machine or the same physical server as the SoftLook application. So no, it does not have to be a dedicated server. And maybe Travis, do you want to maybe speak to a little bit to the specs on that? I mean,
sure. The server itself is IIS. It's an application in IIS, and it can be shared on another server. The specs are very lightweight. I think it's under 2 megs of hard drive space. You don't need a screaming machine to run the SoftLook server itself.
Thanks, Travis.
You're welcome.
Okay, and another question. How is the SoftLook software deployed?
Travis, I'll let you go again.
Sure. The client itself is an MSI deployable file. You can install it one by one, or you can deploy it using Active Directory or another method of deploying MSI files.
All right. And there's another question here. How about the remote phone sets location, not soft phones? So I'm assuming that must be hard phones is what George is asking there.
Yeah, so yeah, I mentioned earlier, like Avaya, they just gave us a list of all of their remote workers and their home addresses and the phone number. So we took that information and loaded it into the database. We have other customers. There's another one we're doing right now that they're actually leveraging human resources database in terms of the user's locations, their home addresses, and then they're giving us their phone number, obviously, and that's the way they're giving us that information. We then load it to the 911 database. That way, if someone does move, they're basically making sure that, you know, they're checking that human resources database to know that if anything changes, that we have to update the 911 database. So, unfortunately, there's no way now currently to allow a user self-provision on their hard phone, but I would imagine that's going to be here one day, but just not yet. So at this time, we're relying on the customer. I know of another customer who sent out basically a group email to everybody saying, send me your home address and your phone number, and they compiled the data and they sent it to us, and we loaded it into the database. So, you know, there's not one way that our customers have done it, but it can be done.
Okay. A couple more questions still. We keep coming in. What about users using Flare for the Avaya IP office?
Well, that's something that we're actually talking about right now with Avaya. As I mentioned, they're a customer of ours. So that's something we're discussing right now. There'd have to be some kind of app developed for that. So, but the thing is with those, if it's going through the PBX, then, you know, that would be needed. If it's going out on a wireless, you know, out the wireless connection, then obviously the Verizon and the AT&T wirelesses that would be their responsibility. But that's something that's in talks right now. I don't think that's available from any of the 911 vendors yet. I haven't really seen it, but I imagine it's going to come one day. You know, we generally develop this stuff when a customer requires it. You know, if we don't have a lot of customers asking for it, then we're not going to go out and, you know, develop something like that. So if that's a need, you know, please let us know and something we can talk about.
Okay. There's another question here. If a remote user with a phone set moves, can the administrator lock that phone until the new location is defined? And I'm assuming, again, this is a phone set, not a soft phone.
Not that I know of, to be honest. No, not that I know of. That's why there's going to have to be some education generally to let people know what you're providing to them. Hey, hey Joe, we're loading your phone number for your VPN hard phone into the 911 database. So if you take it and move it anywhere, please notify us, or send out a group email or something like that. But no, not at this time.
Okay. I think that may be the end. Anybody else wants to chime in with another question? I think we may be done. Give people here another minute. Any other questions?
Just to remind everybody, this will be available as a recording and the whole presentation and the audio portion. So if you would like a copy, you can certainly let us know and we can get it to you.
All righty. And I think that may wrap it up. We'll give people here another 10 seconds or so. But thanks, Mike and Travis, for doing the presentation today. I think people learned a lot of stuff today. Again, if there are any questions, please jump in there. If not, we'll wrap this up. Put Mike's contact information up here. And if anybody wants to get a hold of Mike, you can email him there or give him a call. All righty, that will conclude the presentation today. Again, thanks everyone for joining, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks, Kevin.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.